Our history of insurance as a body of churches is that we were fairly well fragmented until 10 years ago, and as well as being chair of All Churches Insurance Bureau, I'm chair of the Anglican Insurance Board, and Anglicans can be as fragmented as the wider church, and some cooperate and others do better elsewhere. But we began by standardising our behaviour by finding a common insurer in ANZVAR Insurance. That's led us to using a common policy wording, which then makes it easier to make a claim. It's easier for the insurer to pick up a common policy, and I would immediately argue, therefore it costs them less so the premiums can come down. We were one voice who spoke to that insurer. And we got to the strange situation where the chief executive of our ecclesiastical insurance group in the UK and the chairman of that company would come out once a year to talk to us, because evidently we're the only people anywhere in the world where many denominations get together to talk about insurance and present that one face to the insurer. And we worked tirelessly at continuous improvement and cover. Wherever Keith could chisel another little bit in the policy wording, he would do so. And then in 2010, 2011, our previously comfortable existence changed. It hurt me in terms of the money, nothing like the hurt that Greg and the other people suffered. But the December 2011 renewal was quite a shambles. We were given 30 days notice that we would be finding another insurer. From my viewpoint and the Anglican Insurance Board, that meant that I had no insurer at all for the Christchurch diocese, because at that point all the insurers had closed ranks and they weren't taking on new clients. So we scrambled for cover, and a slide a bit later will show you how that changed. We stripped a lot of the natural disaster cover has been dropped out by many churches. It's the cost of the premium. I mean, it runs completely counter to the logical argument that Greg puts forward, that although our most frequent loss is fire, our biggest losses come from earthquake. And also, I think there is also a question there of intergenerational equity, that if we have inherited something from our grandparents, we don't look after it, we can't then pass it through to our grandchildren. But we were in the position prior to December 2011 where everyone who buys insurance is, where we would go to the insurer and simply say, we'd like 3 kilograms of insurance, please, and they'd say, here's the premium, and we pay that premium, and that was it. We moved to a position like this over 29 days. So what this is where we were finding $100 million worth of cover on that axis. And these were, all those names there are all different Lloyd's syndicates. My favourite one is the International General Insurance, based in Amman in Jordan. 2 days into it, they came in and picked up 15% of our entire portfolio from top to bottom. And then gradually the other ones filled up, so that before our policies expired at 4 o'clock on 31st of December, at 9:30 in the morning we heard that that was all filled. That's a very messy way to buy insurance at a short term, and it has a horrible effect on the premium rate. That shows what our premiums were like, and this is the premium rate, so it's not the premium. What I've got our techo to do is to divide the sum insured, the premium by the sum insured, to strip out the gradual growth in the value of the buildings, so that the premium rate has run along pretty well, not doing a lot, and then it jumped when we had to go to the London market. 3 months later, we stripped out a lot of the earthquake cover for many of the dioceses, and it's come along, and then 6 denominations got together at this point. We've pushed it down again. That there hurt a great deal of the reserves of a great many of the churches, where they had to come out with that chunk of money. And I'll refer to a lifelong mission I've given myself on that to get that money back to them. But you can see, by looking at that, what the effect has been. You would have read in Sunday's paper that the Australian-based insurers are doing quite well at the moment. That's because the base of insurance has moved from there to there. What's that? Doubled. Their claims haven't doubled, but the premiums have. So that's what they call, I think, a robust position, isn't it? Gouging is another way, yes. The dilemma that's in front of us is what is good stewardship. We're not commercial property owners. We're people who happen to own some commercial properties, i.e. non-residential. But we've inherited some old buildings. I was asked to run a session down at Otago University by the Department of Theology a couple of weeks ago, where the churches down there own a whole lot of gold rush financed buildings, scores of buildings per denomination, which they've inherited from people in the past. I have served on enough Anglican vestries to know all about deferred maintenance. You know, oh, we really must do something about the roof perhaps next year when we've got the money. I very much suspect that Roman Catholics and Presbyterians have a similar modus operandi in that regard. Cost of insurance has increased, as I showed. Building code is increasing. More importantly, I think the population are becoming aware of this. It was proven in February 2011 that you can be killed by a building even if you're travelling past in a bus, that things can fall off a building and kill you. The population is aware of that. I don't know about where you live, my congregation's getting older. And the global financial crisis is cutting into the investment returns of what money we do have invested. Cost of remediation is going up. We decide we want to pull down the buildings, the cost of demolition has gone up. So we're in quite a robust pair of pincers as far as all our operations go as good stewards. But although I'm talking about insurance, what we're really talking about is risk assessment and risk management, and they're the precursors to that. And on this, no, try again, wrong button. Here, if we look at the probability of something happening and then the impact of that thing, highly unlikely to happen, very small impact, it's what's coloured green. Very strong impact, almost certain to happen, is horrid and it's red. And as you go down that impact and certainty, you go from red through amber, through yellow to green. What we have learned to do, and in the Anglican Church we carry the first $500,000 of insurance in our own book, is that we have learned to throw some money in the bank or in the budget to cover the small amounts, so we're not dollar swapping with the insurer. That way the premium rate comes down. This here, I think this is where faith and prayer come in, because it's certainly quite expensive to pay for large amounts of insurance here. And this area here is where the insurance cuts in. And that's where, in conjunction with the other denominations, we're trying to find some innovative ways to manage that so that we're not sending all our money off to some gnome in Zurich in order to fatten his bonus. And if we look at dealing with the risk, I'd like to start with the idea that, as you're all aware, at Verdun, the French doctors invented triage just to deal with the huge volume of wounded that were coming towards them. So a doctor would stand there and say, that man's going to die anyway, put him over there. That man will recover on his own, let him recover over there, and the ones where our intervention will give them a chance of life, let them come through. If I apply that to our buildings, then we have some buildings that are must-have. If I went around the room, you'd all disagree on which buildings they are, but we will come up with some buildings that we must have. There are some buildings which are nice to have, and I suggest there are some buildings that we ask, why do we have them? And that's where we can start, I think. We can start by saying, rather than saying, hey, this costs too much to insure, do we actually need to own it in order to insure it? I will ask you whether or not surplus buildings can be converted to another use and then on-sold. What we could do is say we don't want a particular church, let's sell it at a knockdown price, the developer grabs it, changes it into a restaurant, B&B, whatever they change it into, and then makes a great deal of money out of it. Why don't we do that? Why don't we convert a church we don't want into a restaurant, find a chef, tenant it, and sell an ongoing business, and bank all that developer's gain? And why should I do it on my own? Why can't I work in with Greg, and why can't all denominations do that? Then we're actually controlling one end of the market. So rather than being the victims of the developers who take what they want from us, we actually deal with the buildings. We can then employ 20, 30, 40 people to plan the way in which we move on surplus buildings. If I was standing in an Anglican synod, there would be booing, hissing and throwing of rocks at this stage. But this is just logic. I mean, I suffer for my sins, having grown in the actuarial profession, that logic always seems to be a good thing to use, but that's one way in which we could deal with the risk. Good stewardship said that we should insure against huge losses. Otherwise, suddenly there's something that gives us a huge loss and we say, whoops, sorry, I wish that hadn't happened. And we can build the fund to handle the small losses ourselves. We just build that into our budget, operational budget for the year. Therefore, the insurance that we do buy costs less because we're turning up less often with the insurer. What I'm going to say now, we should be balancing the time, money and energy spent on buildings against a gospel imperative which you're all aware of from St. Matthew, where we are asked to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and visit the prisoner. And if there are children who are being abused or are hungry or they're not learning or they're falling short of their potential, can we justify spending money on buildings? I'm describing two ends of a spectrum here. Obviously, as an Anglican, I would suggest there is a middle way that we do a bit of both. But also our churches are a part of the architectural heritage of New Zealand. So is it defensible to allow them to decay through lack of upkeep? I was, for my sins, brought up in Oamaru, and Thames Street has got a preserved Victorian facade which everybody who goes down that street owns. I was a choir boy and an altar server in the Anglican church at the end of the street, which has got a huge spire on it and it's a wonderful looking building. It now has a much smaller congregation who are much older than they used to be. That's something which is owned by the people of Oamaru, and they're very nice people. They allow the Anglicans in there to upkeep it so it looks good. But I wonder, there's some questions to be asked about who owns that streetscape, who contributes to the cost of it. Are we stewards for the rest of New Zealand, and as kind Christians we maintain that for them? I'm not very good on answers. I've got a woolsack full of questions that I can ask. And as I said earlier, we've got stewardship of the church's assets, and where does that stop and stewardship of gospel imperatives begin? We've got to look at doing things, I think, which are efficient, and we have demonstrated in All Churches Insurance Bureau that by sitting down and presented a common face to insurers that we can be more efficient in doing things ourselves. We've got to look at the risks that we face and the way in which they're mitigated, and what forums are required and how they might occur. And you've said earlier that at All Churches Insurance Bureau we talk about the insurance. I wonder if there's a place for another forum for the people responsible for buildings to sit together and say, and in fact, when I was a fortnight ago in Dunedin, Bishop Kelvin Wright, who's the Anglican bishop, said that if they got to a small town, perhaps somewhere like Gore, and there were 4 or 5 churches, not all of which were fit for purpose, should the denominations not be sitting there saying, hey, should we let 3 of these go and we'll use 2 and we'll put a roster on them, and people can worship where they want to, and make better use of that combined money. And there again, I can feel the bricks heading towards me in certain rooms as suggesting that. But I mean, this is logic, and it's how we should look at it. Talking about, I've mentioned already, cost effectiveness of insurance. Certainly by using a bigger deductible, so that's the amount of money that we carry on our own book, we're going to turn up and talk to the insurer far less often. So if we're carrying $500,000 and we've had $400,000 worth of claims in a year, the insurer doesn't even know about that. That is reported to the insurer, so he's aware of what the behaviour of the risk is there. And in fact, in the touch wood, in the year and 3 quarters that we've been with the London market so far, we haven't taken any claims through to them yet. They could move their premiums down a lot less in the light of that, I feel, but they have a contrary view. But by doing that, it's a way in which we're more sensible use of our monies. We are actively looking at the use of structures such as underwriting agencies and captive insurers to get control over that process. It hurt very much on the 1st of December 2011 when the insurer suddenly said, that's it, it was an interesting party, we're going home in a month. If we actually own the structures ourselves as churches, and there's no point in the Anglicans doing something, Roman Catholics doing something, Presbyterians, if we do that as a group, then no one can do that to us again. I mean, we can, I think it was Peter Ustinov who said that he was so determined not to make the mistakes his father made in raising him, that he made mistakes his father would never dreamed of. And so if we can actually own the insurance ourselves, the insurance company ourselves, we'll be able to make mistakes that other people don't, but at least it'll be ours that we can make mistakes with. And as I said earlier, I think the bigger the bulk, the better the buy, and as senseless as all going off, I think, inventing a wheel on our own. Cooperation is possible. In December last year, 6 denominations got together and made a joint placement of $3.2 billion of assets. Premium, I think, was around about 5.9 million. And in the next meeting of the All Churches Insurance Bureau, there was one denomination who said, I really didn't think you guys were going to make it, and that's why I didn't join in. But now that you have, I will. So, I mean, his name, I think, was Matthew. There are other denominations looking at joining us. As I said earlier, we're looking at the feasibility of an underwriting agency or a captive insurer. That would give us the ability to move out of the retail market into the wholesale market, so that rather than just talking to insurers, we can talk to reinsurers as well. They're people who live further up in the stratosphere, whose premium rates are a bit lower because they take on the higher levels of risk. And I bore every insurer I talked to rigid by talking to them about profit sharing. If we can go for 2 years without a claim, then surely I can sit down and look at their balance sheet and work out what the cost of capital was and what the amount of profit was. And if they are no good at algebra, I'm exemplary. I'm happy to sit down and write a formula for them for a share of profit. That should build over time. And as I showed you in that earlier slide, there was a big spike at the beginning of 2012, which tore a lot of money out of church coffers. And if we can build profit over the coming decades, we'll be able to take that back and rebuild that money, which then can be used to house the homeless and clothe the naked and feed the poor, which is really what we want to be doing, rather than sending money off to gnomes in Zurich. So that, I think, comes to a blank slide. Right.